So I am Kimberly Payne. I am the editorial coordinator and essentially the in-house pattern designer at So Daily. So I have for years have been a contributor to the magazine, and it wasn't until November that a job opened up that was the perfect fit for me and what I have been doing for years. I'm a sewing pattern designer. My business outside of Sew Daily is straight stitch designs. So I've been making patterns for probably, gosh, 9 years. And like I said, I've been contributing to the magazine, contributing patterns, some tutorials, but mostly patterns. And then slowly I started being, the grader and the digitizer. And then, like I said, in November, this job opened up and it was a perfect fit for me. And so I'm excited to be an actual member of the team. And so any patterns, for the most part, that you've sewn in the last few years, I've touched in some way, whether I've designed them or graded them. And so it's been a really fun chance for me to share something that I love and share it with all of the readers. And so I am no expert, yet I feel like I'm a bit of an expert on sewing. I love sewing knits. And so I'm hoping that today I can kind of walk you through not only sewing this bodysuit, but also kind of the way that I go about my sewing practice, some of the things that I do. And I would say that I say this every time I teach a class, and I've been teaching for years, that I'm kind of giving you permission to not be perfect. In sewing, I think there's so many times when um, you get this feeling like, oh, well, there's a proper way to do things, and I'm not doing it right. And I think that that discourages people. So instead, I'm saying just do it however you want. I'm a very like loosey-goosey sewist. There are no hard and fast rules for me. And what I'm going to do today is show you how I do things. And I'm probably going to get some mixed up, but it's just one way to do it. And if you have a way that you prefer, or if somebody has taught you another way that you love, then do that. Feel free to share. If something comes up and you do it a different way and you want to share with everybody else, put it in the comments because I think that there's so much like excitement in sharing the way that you do things with other people. Not only is it fun for you to share this knowledge you have, but I think it's also really fun for other people to learn a new way to do things. So today is all about learning about this bodysuit. And some people have started introducing themselves. If you take a moment, tell us your name, tell us where you are tuning in from. I'd love to hear who has sewn knits before, who's scared to sew knits, and if you've sewn a bodysuit. I love hearing all the things. And since we can't all be together, then we're going to use the chat like our chance to just sort of hang out, share with each other, and just have fun. It's all about having fun. So there is literally no pressure here. It's just sort of me hanging out with you, sharing what I do. And then in the end, we get to sew a bodysuit, which is really fun. So it looks like there's some people commenting. So just so you do know, I'm here in my home studio in on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. So I live about halfway up the island. It's a massive island, but I'm out here in the country. And I'm originally, though, from Seattle. So I'm an American living in Canada and loving it. And so I'm tuning in from my home studio. We are lucky enough to have Sadie Metter, who is sort of my right hand lady. I'm her right hand gal. We are kind of a package deal at this point. And she is in the studio in Golden. And so she is going to be sort of on the chat, answering questions she might have, just making sure that I see the things I need to see because there is a lot going on here to make this happen. So if anything comes up, ask the question. I'll keep my eye on the screen. But in the meantime, I'm going to kind of just get started. But if anything comes up, like I said, please put it on the chat. Now, I will see, I've seen some people making comments, so I would like to look and see if I've missed anything. I see that we've got somebody from Chicago. Hi, Melanie. And somebody from Finland. We have somebody from Finland, and was the Netherlands? Was that up at the top? Oh, yes, and Esther's in the Netherlands. So this is so exciting. And I saw in Ontario. Did I see a fellow Canadian up there? Where are you? So, anyways, this is all very exciting to me. I love talking sewing. Oh, yeah, Jane, you're in Canada. And we've got some people that have sewn with knits. So, it's going to be really fun. So, what I will do is share a little bit about the pattern, and then we can go ahead and sort of get started. So, this is a full butt bodysuit, so no thong on this one. And it is, sorry, it has snaps at the crotch, so it makes for slightly easier bathroom use. It has long sleeves. This, like I said, is elbow length because I didn't have enough fabric. And then it has a turtleneck. It's not like a full fold over turtleneck. It's definitely more of like a mock turtleneck. And I was just telling Sadie that depending on the fabric you use, you get a totally different look. So one of the fabrics, or the fabric that I'm using today, is a cotton lycra, and this is from Art Gallery. So this cotton lycra is going to wear completely different than this. I believe this is like a bamboo knit jersey. Um, this bodysuit is double lined. That is my attempt at hiding some of the, sometimes with a bodysuit, you see every little like bra strap. It's relatively good at hiding the bra straps in the back, and it just feels a little bit more cozy. So it is double lined. This detail, so when we were originally designing this pattern, we had thought, let's do a raglan bodysuit. And for anybody who has sewn a raglan before, you know that the raglan gives you a lot of extra fabric through the armpit. And so I just couldn't get the fit that I wanted for this pattern. And so, sorry, I'm going to mute my thing so you guys don't have to hear my messages coming in. Um, so I wanted the look of a raglan, but the ease of just a regular t-shirt shape. So we've got this really fun detail here on the bodysuit. So you can see that it comes down here and meets at this point, and then there's the same accent across the back. Now, what's great about this pattern is that the lining does not have the accents here. So if you wanted to sew a version that doesn't have this, then you can easily just omit what's considered the main and just sew the whole thing with the accent, or sorry, with the lining. So we can go over that once we actually get going on there. Um, and the pattern is, as with all of our patterns, they are available in size 0 through 34. And that is all for a bit of body measurements. So that has a range of 32-inch through 54 3/4 inch bust. And then for the hips, we have a 34.5 through uh, 53 3/4. So we have like it's not a perfect size range, but we try to accommodate as many sizes as we can. And this, though, is definitely a pattern that has negative ease. So it is obviously drafted based on those measurements, but we will go over how to take your body measurements, how to choose a size, and then how to grade between sizes because so many of us have to grade between sizes. On my size chart, I grade between a 12 at the bust and a 20 at the hips. And so I can't just go to any standard pattern and just sew a size. I have to grade between sizes. So if you're not familiar with that, that's definitely one of the things that we're going to talk about today. The other thing to mention is that this pattern is drafted based on a standard height of 5'9". Now, this is just body measurements, so that is determined by, the measurement from your, clavicle um, to your ankle or to the floor. Everybody's proportions are different, and so you may not need to shorten it any. If you have a longer torso, the benefit of making your own is that you can make those adjustments. So I will go over that as well. Let me just make sure. Oh, my kids are very sweet. My son just commented, "Slay Queen." He's 11. So, anyways, my kids are apparently watching as well. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure there's something I've forgotten. If there was any question you had about the pattern or about any of that, feel free to put it in the comments, and either myself or Sadie will get that question answered. So, with any pattern, you want to find the size chart, which in this case, if you've got the pattern, it's at the very top of page 2. And you need to choose your size based on the size chart. You don't want to use the finished garment measurements because that is sort of what that those measurements have taken into account any ease, or in this case negative ease, and any style preferences. So the purpose of the finished garment measurements is that you can look at the size chart, choose your size based on your body measurements, and then based on whatever size you need, you can then go to the finished garment measurements and determine if you need to make any adjustments, or if there's too much ease, or if you want a slightly different fit. So I was going to do the top down, but I realized this printed out quite light. So I'm just going to talk you through this. So the three measurements that are most important for this pattern, and probably for a lot of other patterns, are your bust, your waist, and your hips. And so we are going to take those measurements, and then I will sort of talk you through all of the rest. So if you're not familiar with taking your own body measurements, we are going to take, like I said, the bust. Something that I forgot to mention before, this pattern is drafted based on a B sewing cup. So a B sewing cup is not the same as a bra cup. A B sewing cup means that or a sewing cup means it's the difference between your full bust measurement and your upper bust measurement. So we will take both of those, and the difference between them is the sewing cup size. So if you have a 1-inch difference, that's an A, 2 inches is a B, 3 inches is a C, and so on. So if you are larger than probably a C, you might need to make some adjustments, but I will show you and this works for knit, I will show you my cheater full bust adjustment when we get to sort of the pattern pieces. So to take the upper bust measurement, you are going to take the measuring tape around the back. Now, this is usually in line with your bra strap, if you wear a bra, and then up and over the fullest part of your bust. So you want this to be snug. You don't want it to be too tight. You should be able to take a deep breath and not have it constrict. So you find that measurement either in inches or centimeters and make note of that on your pattern piece. Although I realize the upper bust isn't on here, but you can still make note of where you fall. The upper bust measurement. So in my case, it's like a 41. Um, I mean, I already know. You can just make note of it. So 41. Then keeping it in the same place in the back, you're going to bring it down across the fullest part of your bust. So in my case today, I'm wearing a bit more of a bra today. So I actually have 42 for my fullest part of my bust. That means that I have an A sewing cup size, which normally I don't have in anything. Normally my upper bust and my full bust are the same size, but it's good to know. And then we are going to take our waist measurement. So everybody's waist is in a different place. I can say in the past I've had a waist. Now I just kind of like don't. So if you aren't sure where your natural waist is, typically what I tell people is if you bend from side to side, that is going to be about where your natural waist is. Some people that is smaller, but for a lot of us it isn't. And if you're like me and you carry a bit, I'll turn to the side. If you are like me and you carry a bit of weight right here at the front, you want to make sure you capture that in your measurement. You don't want to bring the measuring tape down, but you definitely want to try to capture any weight that you carry at the front. So in my case, it's right about where my jeans are. And that's that's a 39. And then your the last measurement is your hips. So this again is different on everybody, but it's the fullest part of your hips. And in my case, you can't totally tell, but I carry more of my weight right here in, I guess, what they call the saddlebags. So I carry both weight here in the side, and then you can't totally tell, but I got a big butt. So when I'm taking that hip measurement, I need to make sure I'm capturing that measurement so that the garment that I end up with actually fits that measurement. So same with the rest. You're going to go around the fullest part of your hips, take that measurement. In my case, that's about a 49 and a half. And then we are now left with the sizes I need to then pick my size chart. So if you are the same, or sorry, if you have taken your measurements and if you have any questions about what size you should choose, we can, if you would like to share, and I can sort of walk through people choosing sizes, or I am always available by email if you have any questions. So I will provide all of this information after if anybody wants to chat with me about how to choose the size. So we will go based on my sizes, so I can walk you through how I would choose a size based on my own sizes. Give me a moment. I think I need a sip. If I'm talking too fast, let me know. Okay, so as I mentioned, my upper bust is a 41, my full bust is a 42. Uh, Typically, that would mean that because this pattern is drafted for a B cup, that I would technically need to do a small bust adjustment. I have never done that. I'm a little bit lazy in that regard. So because I don't care if it's slightly bigger across the bust, I usually don't bother. And I'm not wearing fit and flare. So the time that that is probably way more important is if you're doing something that's intended to be very fitted across the bust. So in this case, we're going to pretend like I need a B sewing cup. So this is definitely one of those times where you can sort of go based on how comfortable you feel. Like I said, I there's no hard and fast rules for me. So I'm going to just focus on my full bust measurement. So my full bust measurement is a 42. So if I go to the size chart, and the full bust is a 40, size 12 is a 41, and size 14 is a 42. Because I know that I'm an A sewing cup, I'm just going to go ahead and choose the size 12 for that. Now, again, it, it's all sort of trial and error. Every pattern's going to be different. But for me, I would do a size 12. And that's what I'm wearing right now. And with this bra, which is my bigger, padded bra, the fit is actually really good. So the fit isn't just about the bust, the fit is also about the shoulders. So that's why we take that upper bust measurement, because that says if you had no bust, this is your frame. So for that, I would do a size 12. Now, my waist is 39, which puts me pretty solidly. It was a little bit smaller yesterday when I printed out my pattern pieces, but we all know how that goes. So as of today, that makes my waist a size 20. So I've got a bust of a 12, my waist is a 20, and then I already know that my hips are a 20 as well. So when I'm grading between sizes, I'm going to be grading from a 12 for the top part out to a 20 at the waist and the hips. Now, if I was to go to the finished garment measurements, you can see that, oh, that's hard to read, that there is, so for the bust, there is negative ease of 2 3/4 inches. So that allows it to, sort of be tight without being too tight. So I feel pretty comfortable with all of that. And now, if there aren't any questions, I will go ahead and talk about the sewing pattern pieces. So I want to show you guys how we'll start with this one, how I grade between sizes. So let me just switch so you guys can see the overhead view. Okay, let me just zoom out a bit. Okay. Okay, so what we have here is the bodysuit pattern. So this is the back, and this is the lining. So this is, like I said, the lining does not have the cutouts on the front. So what that means is I've chosen, as of yesterday, I had 3 sizes, even though today it's telling me I don't. So this is a size 12, and then this one is the size 18 and the size 20. Okay, so as I mentioned, you want to make sure that you follow the size 12 for the front neckline, the shoulder, and through the armhole or the arm side. Okay, so this is all based on that upper bust and bust measurement. Now, if you think about it in terms of technically this is where the bust is, but your boobs are definitely not just right here. So what I like to say is follow the size you need for your bust for a couple of inches. And then you kind of identify where, I'm going to move this up a little, where you need to be at the waist, which as of yesterday was here, and where you need to be at the hips, okay? So you could be super technical and get like a French curve to do this, or you could be me and just kind of eyeball it. Okay, that went a little, I'll use my favorite erasable friction pen. It also doesn't have to be perfect. Normally I wouldn't even change that, but okay, so you can see here, I was 12 to an 18, and then for the hip, I need to be out to a 20. Once you've done that, then you just follow the 20 for the rest of the piece. Okay, so I typically will take, a marker or whatever and draw out what the lines are going to be and then cut. Or if I'm lazy, I just wing it and hope that I get it correct. But if not, tape is your best friend. The amount of times that I have to tape a pattern back together and then cut it again happens more often than not. So this is a solid piece. This is how it would work for any, really this method of grading works for anything. But since we're also working with a piece that doesn't have, so this is, let me move this one out of the way. So this is for the front with the accent pieces that we have that I've removed to give the illusion of the raglan. So these actually end up going together like so, kind of like that. And then that, in theory, matches the piece that we just traced out. So because of that, you kind of have to look at this in a slightly different way, but you're still essentially doing the same thing. So in my case, remember, I'm a size 12 at the bust, and then the waist point is here, right here. So I'll just scoot this up. So we know I need to be here for the waist and I need to be here for the hips. Now, it gets a little tricky because of the nature of this section and the corresponding piece over here. So you have a couple of options. The waist is not, this isn't a huge distance. So what you could do in this case is aim to be at the waist size just above here. Because if you look over here, we actually hit the waist about right here on this piece. So if you look about where we hit the waist anyways while we were grading is about here. So there's probably a very technical way you should do this, but I'll tell you how I do it. So I'm coming down here in the size 12, which is where I need to be. And then I'm just going to work my way right here. So follow here and then come here. And then I know I need to be here for the waist and then here for the hips. Okay. So I hope that that makes sense. I think the key is as long as you're not here for the waist and here for the hips, then whatever else you do is not that big of a deal. All of the pattern pieces do come layered for the sizes. So you can, although I have a plotter printer here in my studio, if you print it out even on print at home and you tape it all together, you can just select the 2 or 3 sizes that you need. So you're not working with a bunch of different lines. So if you look at what we did here, we're essentially going to do the same right here. Okay. So I might have just, yeah. Okay, so we're going to do the same. Sorry, I just had a brain block real quick. Okay, so we are going to follow the 12 here. and then follow the 12 through the armhole. Okay, but in this case, we only need to be to right here because this piece is the waist part. Okay, so this is going to be right here. It's hard to tell just because of the paper, but what you're going to do is work your way right here, okay? And then the same is going to be said for, we did this distance here, which is over here. So you're going to follow the 12, follow the 12, follow the 12, and then we need to reach this. So you're going to follow. And then, thankfully, it's knit, so we get to kind of fudge it if we need to, but those pattern pieces should all come together quite well. And then you can cut them out. Now, whatever you do to the front, you need to do to the back. And so we just did this. This would be for the front. Although I just realized I did the back accent here, so do as I say, not as I do. um, and then we did this for the front, and then do the same for the back two pieces. Now, I do want to show you before we kind of move on. I mentioned cheater full bust adjustment. Oh, I realized my questions went away. Okay. Yes, so Jennifer, the length is the same for all sizes because we draft for just one height. The length is the same. There is a slight, I mean, it's like 0.3 centimeters difference in the shoulder, and that's just like the angle of the shoulder. But it's all based on the same length, and that length is measured um, from the center, like the bump right here on your neck, um, down to the finished length, I believe, unless I note otherwise in the size chart, which I've been known to say one thing. Oh yeah, measured from center back. So it is the same for all sizes. If you were going to adjust at all, you can easily yeah, actually, you can, here, we'll look at this one. So you could actually just use this waist line right here. Let me move some of these papers around. So if you needed more or less room, you can cut the pattern piece right across here. It doesn't really matter, but this is the waist point. And then cut it apart and either spread it apart if you need more room or overlap it um, for less room. I see there's a question, just a moment. Oh, let me look at the chart. That's Melanie, that's probably just, oh yeah, so Melanie, we found that mistake and I updated the finished garment measurements for the hip, and the new file should be in there. We thought we had caught it before anybody printed it, but the finished garment measurements at the hip for size 16 is actually 40. So it's a 40. There must have been some mistakes in that first one because I show for size 16. It is a finished measurement of 41 1/4, a waist of 31, and a hip of 40. So if you printed out the pattern previously, um, I believe a couple of weeks ago, we discovered that the finished garment measurements, thanks for the reminder, Melanie, that I had pasted some centimeter finished garment measurements into the inches. It was a bit of a mess. So that's page 3. Page 3 was updated. So if you go back into your account and download the pattern again, check page 3. Those numbers should all be updated. But we can also post it somewhere so that you can see, because there's other minor mistakes as well. So we will probably, this is a bigger conversation, but we'll probably create a page on the website that has, I think it's called an errata, basically a list of any sort of mistakes that have been identified. So if you have printed it out previously, you can just fix those mistakes instead of reprinting it. So the pattern pieces didn't change. It's just that my cutting and pasting was the mistake. So that should hopefully help you, Melanie. But if not, feel free to email me and we can talk through that. So if you do need more length through the waist, typically that's where you sort of make the adjustment, not just lengthening it at the bottom. Then you just cut across, spread it, or overlap it if you need less room, and tape. So it's pretty straightforward. The one thing I did want to show you before I move on to actually sewing the pattern is what I had mentioned was my cheater full bust adjustment. And I cannot take credit for this. This was a tester years ago who mentioned that this is what she does, and it's brilliant. And so I have continued to recommend it to people. So this is a bit extreme, but we'll pretend like this would be a huge difference. This is probably, well, I have a measuring tape. So if I was to add this much width, that's adding 4 inches. So that's going from a B to an F. But the process is still the same. So for the cheater full bust adjustment, what you are going to do is follow it through the neckline, the shoulder, whatever size you have identified as your upper bust. And then you are going to follow down this line for your armhole. And normally, as we did here, you would come down here, okay? But instead, this has to be the front. We'll pretend like this is the front, okay? You only make this adjustment on the front. Instead, you identify the full bust size that you need for your actual full bust. So using this as an example, the 12 upper bust is a 39. So if you have an upper bust of 39, but say you have a full bust of 45.5. That means this is size 18. What you're going to essentially do is cheat. You're giving yourself more room without changing up here, because you don't need more room through your shoulders, through the armhole. You don't need more room through the neck hole. You just need more room at the bust. So you give yourself more room here, and then you just continue down. And in my case, that would have actually worked out perfect because that's what my waist size is. But if you need to come out any further, you would make that adjustment like normal. So what this does is this is giving you the extra room you need through the bust. So like I said, you only do this on the front, and then I can't really do it on here because I already cut out my sleeve, but so we'll pretend I meant to keep this attached. So we'll pretend like this is the line for size 18. So what you would do for the sleeve is you would do the same. You would come through here for a size 12, and then you would continue out to the width of the 18, and then continue down to whatever size you need. So what that basically does is that you have this amount here that you only do to the front, and then this amount here makes up for that. This is obviously, I'm using very extreme here, but that's all it is. So you are giving yourself the extra room that you need through the full part of your bust without changing the the rest of the fit. So any questions about grading between sizes, making adjustments, I can go ahead and answer those before I move on to, well, we've got cords, before I move on to talking fabric and all of that. So I will watch the chat, see if anybody has any questions while I adjust my thing. Okay. Okay. So I don't see any questions yet, but if they do come up, let me know. Otherwise, we will just go ahead and quickly, sorry, I wanted to show you um, how I'm not going to cut all the pieces out in an effort to save a bit of time. I've sort of pre-cut everything out, which I think I mentioned this fabric. This is also a cotton lycra from Art Gallery. And so between this and the flowery one, they sent us some fabric to use. This is great fabric. If you're not super familiar with sewing knits, cotton lycra is the best place to start because it's stable while still being stretchy. Okay, so I wanted to show you briefly before moving on. Actually, I'll move back to the other view for you. So I treat every sewing pattern like a game of can I beat the sewing pattern designer? Okay, so it's hard to beat myself in fabric requirements, but occasionally I do. So what I like to do is a lot of patterns provide you with sort of a pattern layout. So they show the fabric folded and the best way to sort of lay everything out to get everything cut either completely with the fabric folded in half or some other versions. I don't do those because I find that they waste fabric. So I want to show you though how I lay my patterns out to cut to save as much fabric as possible. So basically, I determine the direction of greatest stretch if I'm working with a knit, and then I fold the fabric as much as you need for the piece that you're working on. Okay, so I'll just let this hang off because it's just for showing. So if you look here, I have folded it as much as I need for this piece. And then I will just work my way across the fabric, cutting all of my pieces before moving to the next row down. Although I'm showing you with a sleeve, normally I would cut the most important pieces first. So, so once I have folded the fabric, I use pattern weights and a rotary cutter, and my pattern weights are actually just some washers from the hardware store. I just bought a big box of them. They work fantastic. And then I use my trusty Fiskars rotary cutter. I think this is a conversation that I have in lots of different sewing classes about like your favorite rotary cutter. Tried and true, my favorite is Fiskars. And then I just use the rotary cutter to cut out my pattern piece and move my way across the fabric. So I just find that that uses much less fabric than, you know, the traditional method. and I'm all about conserving fabric. So that is typically how I go about cutting everything. And then, yeah, those are some of my tricks. Like I said, Fiskars is my favorite rotary cutter. I think everybody sort of has their favorite tools, but that's what I use. And I thought I would, before we actually get started, show you, well, I'll wait till we get there. So, okay, so now we have all of our pattern pieces cut out. Let me just make sure there's no questions. Okay, I'll move this over here. Okay, so now is the fun part. What I'm going to be doing today is showing you how to sew the, let me see if I can turn these machines. I'm going to show you how to sew the patterns, both on a regular sewing machine, as well as a serger. And the machine that I have today to use, oops, here, I'll show you this way, is the Janome Air Thread cover stitch, or sorry, serger. And I don't know if you guys have ever used the air thread, but it is like life changing. And I know that's very dramatic, but I stand by it. So actually, I did a video. If you go to Instagram, I did a little reel yesterday showing just how easy it is to thread. So we are going to be sewing on both the serger, as well as, I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to turn this beast around, as well as I want to show you guys on a regular sewing machine as well. Typically when I teach sewing knits, I show people how to do it on a regular sewing machine. Because not everybody has a serger, and you can get amazing finished knit garments with a regular sewing machine. So the one that I'm going to be sewing on is the Janome Horizon. Let's see, no, the Janome Memory Craft 9450. This is super fancy. I've just been playing with it, and like I don't even know what all of these stitches are, but I will tell you there's two things that I'm obsessed with, and that is, oh, I don't have it plugged in. Let me turn it on. It's supposed to be one of those like wow moments. One, it's bright. So I have an older Janome, and it's great, but it's not quite as bright. But this, isn't that so cool? As my eyes get older, I need more light. So anyways, this is what I'm going to be sewing when I show you guys uh, sewing on a regular machine, or I'm going to be working on the serger. So let me, like I said, it's a beast. This is not a I'm going to travel with this machine type of machine. This is like a studio. Gosh, this tape. Sorry if you guys keep getting cords in your face. Like I said, my studio's got a lot going on. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. If you have the instructions, you can grab them. Let me have a sip of coffee. Okay, so from the fabric, oh, yes, Melanie, I can post the exact fabric that I'm using, but it is the art gallery sent us some of their knit cotton lycra, but I will post in the comments what the actual fabric, the ones that I got. Their fabric is amazing. I've been using art gallery lycra knit, or cotton lycra for years. It's just such a nice stable knit. Um, yeah, that Janome is dreamy. Okay, I have to show you guys. I have to show you the pedal because, okay, I think everybody's used to like a standard sewing machine pedal, right? Okay, this this is the pedal on this machine. And this is like, it's a secondary pedal for cutting threads. It's like so fancy. I can't even like, it just makes me think like when I first started sewing when I was like 15, my mom bought me like a basic brother sewing machine that I used for years and years and years. And when I upgraded, I actually got a Janome years ago, but even this is like so fancy compared to what I have. So, anyways, this is the beefy pedal. Okay, so you guys are all here to sew, so let's go ahead and get started. When you cut out all your pattern pieces, whether you get a print shop file or print it at home, you are going to end up with, you're going to need to have, let me look at the list so that I don't forget. So two, you need a front and a back of the lining. So that's the full piece. Then you need a front and a back with the accent. You need two mirror image front accent pieces, two mirror image back accent pieces, two sleeves, and which are both cut on the fold. And then one of the other mistakes that I found was with the neckband. And it's not necessarily a mistake, it's a style change that I will be making to the pattern because I realized the model has one with just one seam in the back. And so clearly I made her sample and then at some point I changed. This, as it currently is, has a seam on both sides. It really doesn't matter, but I will probably be changing that. But it works either way. Okay, so the other thing to note is the seam allowance for the pattern is, sorry, I need to plug my serger back in. The seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch. So you are going to be, unless otherwise noted, you will sew with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so here comes the fun part. Let me just see, no questions before we get moving. Okay, so what we have here is the front, and this is the front, like this one, that doesn't have it's not the full piece. So this is the front main. Let me change to the overhead camera so you can see how we go about putting this together. Okay, so we are going to be, with right sides together, we are going to be pinning, if you pin, your accent pieces to your garment. So obviously you want the finished piece to be like that. So you are going to, we'll start with just this one. You are going to be sewing these pieces together. Now, the biggest thing you will probably notice is the shape of these two pieces is different. So we're working with a concave and a convex shape. Now, that doesn't mean so what that means is that you're trying to fit two different shapes together. Let's see, like this. The distance is the same. So I promise you, the math tells me the distance is the same, but the angle or the shape is different. Oh, sorry, it looks like it's trying to focus. So what that means is that we have to manipulate the fabric while we're sewing it, but not stretching it. Okay, so that's the key with knits is you do not want to stretch your knits while sewing. You want, unless it's a neckband, you want to try and keep things lined up and not stretched. Now, if a little bit of stretching happens, it's really not that big of a deal. I might just turn this sideways. Um, because honestly, like some of my stuff gets stretched sometimes and it's really not that big of a deal. A lot of times, hot iron if you add some steam, it will go back into shape. But if not, a wash and dry is usually the best. So you can pin as little or as much as you need, but again, try not to stretch it. You're just kind of manipulating the fabric so that it matches up. So you can see just by working about an inch at a time and pinning. I don't know why that, sorry everybody, you'll notice it just keeps zooming in. I'm not really sure what's going on. By working an inch at a time, that's annoying. You are, we have matched up the shape. I'm gonna zoom out a little, maybe that will help. Okay. We have matched up the shape without stretching the actual garment. So those match up. Now you have a couple of choices. You can go ahead and sew this, or you can save yourself a little time and go ahead and pin the second one as well. It really doesn't matter. If you are careful and you don't stick yourself with a pin, you can get away with just pinning them at the same time. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Okay, I apologize, everybody. This zooming is killing me. So we will figure that out before we do this again so that it stops doing that, or focusing, I mean. Okay, so when I am pinning two shapes, this is going to be the case for the sleeves as well. I use what are called touch points, or what I call touch points. So in this case, the touch points are going to be right here because we know that these two match up perfectly. The other touch point is right down here. So even though the shape is different, this also matches. Okay, so if you pin your touch points, then you know these two things are in the correct place. Everything else is a matter of manipulating without stretching. So I like to just kind of work like an inch at a time. The joy of sewing is that you can do whatever you need to make it easier. So if you are somebody who really likes pins or clips, I don't know where all my clips went. They become a bit of a toy for my children. Although I did just have my 2-year-old nephew here, and he thought that the retractable measuring tapes that I have were the most fun toy he had ever seen. So I sent him home with a few. I'll make a sewist out of him if I can. So anyways, just as many pins as you need to feel comfortable that you have pinned it and everything has matched up. So like I said, I have pinned both sides of this. I'll show you before we actually take it to the sewing machine. Okay, so just the only thing you have to be careful of if you pin them at the same time is so that you don't poke yourself. But, you know, I mean, it's kind of a hazard of the job. Okay, so you just have to be careful. We have pinned both sides. You don't want to poke yourself, but, you know, you're probably going to poke yourself at some point. The one thing to make sure you do is, as you can tell from this, we have, you know, a good chunk of fabric up here at the top, and it comes to a point down here because of the nature of the way that this is sewn, is that it makes a point here, and so that means that we're going to end up with no, like there's only the seam allowance right here. So anyways, all of that is to say that I find it's easiest if you start sewing where you have the most fabric so that you're not trying to shove this little bit of fabric into either your sewing machine or your serger. So let me just get my serger here. And if you're like me, I cannot sew with a shoe on, so I got to take my shoe off. Um, so what I will be doing, obviously with a serger, if you haven't used one before, you are going to make sure that you take those pins out as you go, or you can either snap your serger blade, or you can like break a pin off into your eye. I wear glasses, so I'm protected, but still take your pins out. So, like I said, it is 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to sew this first seam. I did sort of pre-sew some of the other steps, but I thought I would show this part. So if you haven't used a serger before, it is cutting the fabric while also finishing the edge. So if you have purchased a shirt from the store and it's got sort of a finished edge on the inside, that is the work of a serger. And you're just going to sew as you go. I do find that, you know, that little bit of fabric that we have at the end is going to, it might not line up, and that's okay. So you're just gonna keep going, and then you can cut it off either with like a cutting needle on your serger, or, you know, your favorite thread snips, which these are my favorite. They lock, look, so handy. Okay, so one thing before we move on is there are, I, as I said, can be a bit of a loosey-goosey sewist. And so if you're like me, you might just trim this serger stitch off and figure that end is going to just get into another seam. Or you can do the official way, which is to take like a tapestry needle of some sort, and let me trim these, thread the ends of your serger thread. So there's 4 threads there. So you might need to, there. So you get them in. And then to secure the serger threads, this is a really long needle. I probably should have gone with a longer tail. You are going to just feed them back through. Let's see, let me go to the overhead again. So you would just thread them back through those stitches for, you know, a couple of inches. You can pull it. I don't want to pull it too tight, but I do like to kind of give it a tug, and then you can trim the stitches, and now those will not come unthreaded. Oh, Felicia, see, we're the same. You can't sew with your shoes on. To me, I feel like I can't feel the pedal, which is funny because I've obviously been driving for many years and I can drive with a shoe on. But, anyways, I don't question it. So, you can properly thread it back through the seam allowance, or I'm sorry, the threads, or you can snip it off like I do. Okay, so I will just go ahead and sew this second one. And I wanted to show you, I don't know if you noticed, but when I sewed the first one, because I needed to sew it with the biggest part of the fabric up here, I ended up sewing it with the accent piece down. And then this one, I'm going to sew with the accent piece up. Again, there are no rules. I just want to make my life as easy as possible. And so because of that, I kind of rotate how I put things into my machine. Obviously, you have more flexibility with a regular machine than you do with a serger, but you know what? Do what works for you. I also typically with a serger will stitch for an inch or so and then stop, because at that point then it's in my machine, it has started going, and the needles are holding it in place, and then I can make some adjustments if I need to. Again, we're not stretching, we are just manipulating the fabric so that those edges match up, and then feeding it into the serger. So let me get that adjustment. But the best thing about sewing any clothes, but especially knits, is I feel like you have a lot more wiggle room than you think. So if you get off a little and your seam allowance is thicker than you normally would want it to be, like maybe you kind of zigzag a little, as long as it's not too dramatic, and nobody would even notice. I also have a thought that the reality is nobody is going to notice or care if your garment isn't perfect. Because if you have purchased clothes from the store, which all of us have, those are never perfect. Like literally never perfect. My daughter years ago had a pair of striped leggings, and it drove me crazy when she wore them because of how horrible I mean, obviously they're not going to stripe match for mass produced items, but like the sewing part of me could not handle how badly matched up they were. So really, nobody would ever question. Nobody's going to come up to you and say, it appears you didn't really line this up. In fact, if you go to the magazine, I'm pretty sure one of the pictures in the magazine shows that I didn't get it perfectly matched up here. So if you want to see the reality of sewing, those pictures are samples that I made. I've sewn this a ton and I still didn't manage to get things lined up. So yes, Sadie, that's exactly. I'm the same way. Sadie's a loosey goosey sewist as well, and she just assumes they're gonna get these seams are gonna get caught in the next set. Okay, so when for that step, so we did the front, we've done the accents, both of the accents on the front, and you're just gonna do exactly the same for the back pieces. Now, I went ahead and stitched that. Um, Felicia, I'm using 3/8 inch seam allowance, or if you are in another part of the world, 1 centimeter. So, like I said, I went ahead and stitched the accents on the back piece to save us a little bit of time so you didn't have to just sit there watching me sew accent pieces on. So what you're going to do once you have sewn the main with the front with the 2 accents and the back with the 2 accents is that we are going to stitch everything together. So you are going to sew the front and the back together along the shoulder seams and the side seams. Now, I am not a big pinner, but obviously I've been sewing these patterns and other similar patterns so many times that I don't use pins. But like I said before, just do whatever works best for you. Like it's not, there's no hard and fast rules when it comes to sewing. So we will do both of the shoulder seams. Now, if you are familiar with knits, a lot of times you can sew, because what the next step is, or in a couple steps, we're going to be sewing the sleeves in. And by sewing what we're doing now, we're going to end up having to stitch the seam in the round. So stitch the shoulder in the round, which I know kind of makes people crazy. I have to admit that a set-in sleeve is probably my most favorite sewing skill ever, but it took me so many years to get to a point where I was comfortable with it. So I will show you today how I do it, just the nature of how this garment comes together, being fully lined. We're going to have to sew our sleeves in like a set-in sleeve, not nearly as complicated as like a woven garment. So I've got both the shoulder seams, and now I'm going to just go ahead and do the side seams. When you are getting to the point where you are matching, remember this little V right here? For one, it doesn't matter if it matches. But if you would like to try to make it match, you will push that, so the seam allowance, push it towards the body of the garment, and then match up right at that point. Okay, so as long, and then put a pin in it or a snap or a clip. So once those are matched, then you have a slightly better chance of getting it matched up. For this one, somehow I got it matched up. I didn't even try. But the one that I did try for the photo shoot, I did not, in fact, get it matched up. So if it's anything like stripe matching, I just hope for the best. Worst case, it doesn't match. So you can be as pin happy as you want, whatever works. But especially with this fabric, um, it is so, the print is so busy that nobody would even look at it and think, why aren't my seams matching up? Speaking of knit fabric, like I mentioned, this stuff is cotton lycra that I'm sewing with today, and this is fantastic fabric for knit beginners. But the one that I'm wearing is actually, I believe, a bamboo. Well, I have the bolt back there. I bet I could find out. It is. Oh, yeah. It's a bamboo rayon spandex. So it's actually quite lightweight, and um, it's not hard to work with, but it's definitely a different uh, activity. So there's so many different types of knits, and I think that as you get started, it's really a chance of, you know, if you're lucky and you live in a city that has fabric stores, which I do not, then you can go to the store, you can stretch, you can feel, you can sort of get a feel for all the different types of knits. Or if you're like me, and I primarily get all of my fabric online. Now, granted, I can usually tell from the fabric weight and the name what it's going to be. But you know, for if you're just starting out, it's going to take a little trial and error. When I first started sewing, specifically knits, I shocked myself sometimes with what actually showed up in my order from what I thought I was getting, just because I had no idea. So sometimes it's just a matter of, even if you're not buying any right now, go to a fabric store and just like touch the fabric, stretch the fabric, feel it, like research after you know sort of some that you like, research how they wash, how they wear. There's so many resources out there that, like, it's hard not to get to know everything a little bit better. But you know, for the most part, my favorite knits are like bamboo rayons because they're kind of like loose and flowy. But I also have, I mean, you guys can see I've got a lot of fabric. It's kind of a hazard of the job, is that you just end up with lots of fabric. You're sewing a lot of samples. In fact, I have a massive box of fabric waiting at the post office for me that I'm actually going to go get after the live for a really cool capsule collection that we have coming out. So by nature, I just work in a lot of fabrics. But another fabric that I recently have started sewing with is, it's called angel skin, and it's definitely more of an athletic one, but I've made a few of the bodysuits out of it. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to see it because I'm trying to find it. I don't, nope, that's not it. I don't know where it is, but I will put a link in the comments. So if you're looking for sort of more of a, I don't know, is that Skims? Kind of like a Skims bodysuit that's definitely like more of a legging or lightweight legging material. That is fabric that's fantastic as well. But if you're just starting, go for cotton lycra. And it looks like Meg, our favorite boss who's on maternity leave, she just joined and she has the cutest little baby ever. Makes me want to have a baby, but not really because my kids are 11 and almost 13. So I am so far out of baby. Anyways, it's fun to see her. We miss you, Meg. Okay, so now what we have is we have the full bodysuit mane, and then I pre-sewed a full bodysuit lining. So the next step is, let me just make sure because sometimes I don't follow my own instructions. Okay, so the next step is we need to insert the lining into the bodysuit so that we have wrong sides together. So the easiest way to do that is to take the lining, which is the one without the accents. Again, as I mentioned, I think at the beginning, you can sew the main, like see how this one has no accents? So you could sew two of the lining sets and then have a bodysuit that does not have this accent. Everything else is the same. So if you're wanting a couple different versions, you can sew some without the accent because the process is the same. So what we're going to do is turn the lining wrong sides out, okay? And then we're going to insert it into the bodysuit, lining up. Just make sure you've got it the right way with fronts together, which I hope I did. Hey, I do. Okay, so now you can see we've got a nice finish on the inside and the outside. You could do a contrasting color or whatever. So in this case, I just did the same fabric. And now we need to baste these together and treat it kind of like this is now one piece of fabric. So there's probably a way to make this so that you don't even see, you're going to see the sleeve seam on the inside. I'm sure there's a way to make it reversible, but I just can't even like wrap my brain around that. And most people don't need their bodysuit to be reversible. So what we're going to do is, let me do the overhead if it isn't going to bug us. And if it does, I'm going to stop using it because it's kind of annoying. Let's see. Okay, so what you can see here is we've got the lining inserted into the bodysuit with wrong sides together. And what you're going to want to do is go through and match all sort of, again, like those touch points. So this is the shoulder seam of the mane, because you can see here's the accent. And this is the shoulder seam of the lining. So what I like to do is, I think there's a name for it, sandwich? No. Anyways, I like to press one seam allowance one way, one seam allowance the other way, so that there isn't a bunch of bulk. Okay, so you're going to pin in all of these areas. You can even pin, you can find center front and center back and pin there as well. Because there's no stretching, as long as you sort of have key places pinned, like I can see that that goes together just by the shape of the neck, then when you're actually sewing this together, you've got those touch points. And the same goes for the underarm. So you're going to put the seam allowance one way, the other seam allowance the other way, and put a pin. Shoulder seams, I mean, again, you can pin it as much as you want. But now what we're going to do is take it to the sewing machine and we will zigzag stitch around the neckline, around the armholes, and then along the leg holes as well. Okay, so basically that is the way that we are going to use to treat this now as one piece of fabric as opposed to two. Okay, so when you sew on a regular machine, I will go ahead and get this one turned on, but I'm working in a small, there we go. Okay, so when you are sewing, I think it's too high. My pedal's not going to work, so we're going to use the start stop. So if you are going to with a knit on a regular sewing machine, I think that there's a lot of options. So a lot of times the sewing machine is going to come with some sort of manual that tells you what the different stitches are. So in this case, there is what they call a lightning stitch, which is like a stretch stitch, and it kind of goes like a lightning bolt, and that's a stretch stitch. I'm kind of lazy because that one takes forever, so I rarely ever use it. Instead, I do a lengthened zigzag stitch. Okay, so what that looks like is it's a zigzag that has a width, oh sweet, has a width of 1 and a length. I'm just changing this machine because it's digital. And then a length of 3.5. Okay, so what that looks like is that is quite, it's a narrow, long zigzag. And that is what I did on this one, and I didn't have any issues. But if you need a bit more stretch, so if you're doing something that's tighter, so say you size down and you want it to be really like compressive, then you might want a bit more width. So maybe a 1.5. But we'll say I do a 1 and a 3.5. Okay, so then you will, I know how to use this machine. There we go. You will take this to your machine and start stitching the pieces together. Now, one thing to remember is with knits, you do not need to back stitch. That is basically a recipe for disaster because um, the fabric will get itself. Oh, there we go. Can you tell I don't use this one all the time? So that's basically going to potentially cause your fabric to get all like gummed up into the machine. So instead, you just know that almost all knit seams end up getting sewn at least a second time. So in this case, we're really just basting everything together. And so you're going to do roughly 1/4 inch seam allowance, because then when we go to actually sew the neckband and the sleeves and everything in, that will be sewn at the appropriate seam allowance. So if you just start sewing, oh, that's fast. Let me turn that down since I'm not using the pedal. And then you're just, sorry, you're just gonna sew all the way around these different seams, making it one piece moving forward. So I don't know, actually, I don't know who has used these machines with start stop buttons, but something interesting came up. Um, Oh yeah, thanks, Sadie. Sadie just reminded me, when you're sewing knits, you're going to want to make sure that you use a ballpoint or a jersey or some sort of stretch needle. And if you didn't know this, this was actually something I learned recently-ish. And it was talking about like what actually the difference is between the different needles. And what I thought was interesting was For a regular machine needle, you know, a sharp or something like that, it's actually poking through the fibers in the fabric. So, you know, a woven fabric, it's like poking through. But for a ballpoint, it's actually moving the weave of the fabric apart, which I think is really interesting. So it's basically pushing the weaves apart so that the needle can go down so that it doesn't stretch or distort. So you can see, maybe I can change the view. You can see that now this is all put together um, around the neckline so that when we actually go to do the neck band or the turtleneck, it will all be one piece. Okay, so I'm just going to stitch up the armholes and the leg holes really quick. And then we'll talk about the, what will we talk about? We will talk about the sleeve. So I'd love to hear anybody who is on the chat if they have experience sewing what's, I guess, technically a set-in sleeve in knit. Sometimes people haven't because most, I believe at least, most knit patterns um, have the instructions so that you can sew it in flat. But like I said, set-in sleeves are my jam. I really, really like it. And so any opportunity I get to do it, I will take. So anyways, I'd love to hear if anybody has experience with it, but if not, that's totally fine too. Okay, let me do a couple more. Um, I don't know if you guys have a subscription or if you have seen the new fall issue, which is absolutely beautiful. I don't even know where mine is, it's somewhere. But obviously, we have this bodysuit in there. And one of the things Sadie and I were recently talking about was, um, sorry, how to style. Sorry, I was talking, I was pressing buttons, I was sewing something I shouldn't have been sewing. Um, so how to style the bodysuit. So as you can see, like right now, we're kind of in that weird fall, at least here in the West Coast. It's one day it's like 80 and the next day it's 60. Or like it was raining and thunder the other day. So like right now, I think is the hardest time to dress, in my opinion. But already I'm like looking forward to ways that I can style this bodysuit. Um, in fact, I actually have one in the works that is sleeveless because I just naturally get really, really hot year round. And so being able to have layers, I mean, layers are key, especially where I live. Um, so if I can have a really cute um, layer and then I can put a blazer over the top or, you know, a jacket or a vest or whatever, then it sort of feels like it elevates the look. And so that is what I'm most excited about with styling it. Sadie, okay, had another question. Um, so yes, similar. So her question was whether or not you stretch while you're sewing the sleeve in. Um, yeah, so with the sleeve, as with the accent pieces, we will not be stretching while we sew. Um, we are manipulating the fabric so that those seams match up. We're not actually stretching. The only time you're stretching is when you are inserting a neckband or other ribbing, an accent. But for the most part, you really do want to avoid stretching unless it's a specific part of the instructions. And then even that, like the neckband, when we sew in the neckband, we're not stretching the neckband and the shirt. You're only stretching the actual neckband. So anyways, sorry you guys, I probably should have sewn this part so you didn't have to just sit here, but um, anyways, I'd love to hear uh, if anybody has a bodysuit, doesn't have to be this one, and your favorite ways to style them, because the whole bodysuit thing is new to me. Again, I'm sure I wore bodysuits when I was a kid with stirrup leggings, but obviously that's been a couple of years. So I'd love to hear how you guys style them. I don't know about you, but sometimes I see really cool outfits and then I just never feel like I can pull it off. So maybe this is the year of actually making it happen. Okay. Okay. Ooh, ooh, I am not familiar with the start stop button. Okay. Um, so with it sewn, oh, I have one more side. Sorry. Uh, so one thing to nope, sorry. Okay, so let me just sew this real quick and then we'll be ready to put in the sleeve. I think that one thing about sewing knits in particular is I think that a lot of times people are really intimidated by the fact that the fabric does stretch. So I would guess that, well, any class I've taught with knits, it's usually the biggest concern for people. But I think that the reality is, unless you're working with um, a very stretchy knit or a very slinky or a knit that rolls a lot, sewing with knits is really no different. And it can be done, like I said, on any type of sewing machine. It does not have to be anything fancy. Um, but obviously, if you sew a lot of knits, I would highly recommend a serger. But I know that that's an expensive price point, so um, it's not going to be for everybody. Oh, okay. So it looks like Sadie, as usual, has great ideas. I would say that I'm probably the frumpy friend that she has because she's always got such cute outfits. But it looks like some of her favorites are a loose, like robe style jacket that she can layer over it with jeans. Um, and I love your idea for a jean jacket because I have a jean jacket and I never really know how to wear it. And because I wear jeans so much, I am always worried that it's going to be like what, the Canadian tuxedo. Um, so I don't wear my jean jacket enough, but I'm sure it would be super cute over a bodysuit. Okay, so we have, let me find my thread snips. We have the front and back sewn together, or sorry, the lining sewn together. And now it is time to insert the sleeve, although it might actually be the turtleneck. We'll do the turtleneck first. Okay, so the turtleneck, I did mention that the instructions show two pattern pieces that you sew together along the sides. What I'm going to probably do is update the pattern so that you are sewing one on the fold, sewing it so that the seam is down the back. It doesn't really matter. The process is the same. So what you're going to do, regardless of if you have the pattern as it's laid out, you're going to have you're going to have two pieces, okay? And then, oh, I cut two of the same. So it will be, as the pattern states, you will sew them together on both ends. And you are going to put the uh, turtleneck pieces together, right sides together, and sew down both sides. I created a different pattern piece so that the seam would be down the back neck. Like I said, I will update that because I kind of like the look of having just the one seam down the back. And so as with that, it's the same. You're just going to sew the short ends together. And then we will turn it over on itself, so it's a tube now. But what we will do is fold it over on itself so that you have basically the finished, it'll be right side out on both. Okay, so you're going to match up the seams, okay, and you can pin. And then you will, if you're using the original method, you have two seams on the ends, or I mean, yeah, on the ends, that you will be matching up with the shoulder seams. Okay, so it goes in, it goes onto the neckband. Let me switch the view. Okay, so it will go onto the neckband matching the side seam of the turtleneck with the shoulder seams here. Now, with my method that I'm changing it to, both work perfectly. You have only one seam, which is going to go center back. So to find the center back, you take the shoulder seams and you fold them together. And then what you're left with is where it is folded, that is your center back. And you can use the same method to find center front. Okay. And then, then you match up. So, sorry. Once you found center front, center back, you match those together because we're going to divide the neckband, although it looks like it is quarter. So in this case, the shoulder seam is in fact the quarter points. That's not always the case. So just make sure you check it. And then we also need to find the center front of the neckband. So center back, center front, and then you just kind of start matching everything up. Okay, so you have a couple of choices. You can either put this over the neckband, or I mean the neckline. It doesn't really matter. Or you can turn it wrong sides out and then slip it into the inside. Whatever you choose, it doesn't really matter. You just have to make sure that the neckband is towards the accent piece. Okay, so in this case, I am just going to slip it over because that is, well, no, let's turn it right inside out. Okay, so it'll slip into the neckband. Okay, so now we have lining out, but we know that the neckband or the turtleneck needs to go towards the right side of the garment. So we're going to put it in here, okay? And then you will match up that center back point with the pin that we previously had. Okay, remove the extra pin. This doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to be stretching this slightly to fit. So it doesn't really matter. Okay, match that up. And then I like to say you want to work in quarters. So then you would match up the quarter point of the neckband with the shoulder seam. Okay, pin that in place. And then do the same on the other side. So the benefit of pinning this in quarters is that as you start sewing, as you go around the turtleneck, you know that every time you reach a quarter point, if everything lines up, then you are good to go and you can keep stitching. If it doesn't line up, you might as well stop, because if it doesn't line up, the problem is just going to get bigger and bigger as you go around. But the key with this is you can see we are not actually stretching it that much. Okay, so I like to do like a little test so I can get a feel for how much I'm actually going to be stretching that neckband. Okay, so once you have that in, you are going to take it. I will do it on the serger, and I always start at center back, like the center back neck. And the reason for that is any mistake you make while putting that neckband in, you can hide at the back. Nobody's ever going to come look at the back of your neck and say, oh, it looks like you messed up when you put the neckband in. Nobody really cares. But it's better than getting around to the front and realizing you have a situation here, as opposed to hiding it at the back neck. Okay, so we're gonna stitch this in. I like to sew with the neckband or the turtleneck on top so that I can be sure that I am only stretching the neckband and not stretching the actual garment. In this case, it's not a huge stretch, so you probably wouldn't get yourself into a situation, but it's still a good thing to practice. Basically, just stretch it the little bit you need and try to avoid um, over or under stretching. It's really like, it's going to take practice. Neckbands were always sort of not something I was good at or enjoyed, partly because it just feels stressful, like trying to make two things work that are different lengths. But typically, what I tell people is if you work like an inch or two at a time, then you can better assess how much the next inch or two has to be stretched. So if you're trying to stretch too much at one time, then you're going to end up getting to a point where you have to overstretch, and then you can see an overstretch more than you can see other problems. So just try to sort of be consistent. That initial stretching gives you an idea of how much you actually have to stretch. Um, so, okay. Okay. So with our seam sewn, you can thread this serger thread through, back through the seams to lock it in, or if you're lazy like me, it's just sitting here and I just shove it back into my shirt. So anyways, okay, now we've got the turtleneck in and we are ready to sew in our sleeves. You can leave your bodysuit like lining out, because we are going to be inserting the sleeve and we need it to be lining out. So the sleeve, regardless of the length that you use, just like with the neckband, we are going to match up the side seam of the sleeve, and we are going to sew the sleeve together along the side seam. If this was sewn in flat, um, we would have sewn it to the garment before we did the side seam of the garment, but obviously the nature of how this is made, we can't do it that way. So we will just go ahead and do this. And what's what's nice about sewing, like I did today, is you can determine the length of the sleeve that you have or that you want, either like me, based on the fabric you have, or just based on the look you want. You can also lengthen sleeves if you have long arms. The sleeves are quite generous in this pattern, but if not, you can just play with it. Like it's just fabric, and you can always try something new. So now we are going to insert our sleeve. Okay, so I already sewed one so that you guys wouldn't have to watch me sew two sleeves together. So the key with inserting a sleeve is, again, matching up sort of those touch points. Okay, so let me put on the overhead and we'll hopefully not have issues. Okay, so we have the bodysuit is lining out. So again, the accent is on the inside, so the lining is considered the wrong side, and the main piece is the right side. Okay, so we are going to be matching the sleeve in the hole. Okay, and just like with the accent pieces, you are working with two different shapes. And so it's a matter of matching up certain points and then manipulating without stretching to get the rest in. So what I like to do is put my hand in the sleeve and then put my arm through the armhole so that I match it up. It's probably not necessary. For whatever reason, that's what I've always done. And then what you're going to be doing is matching up the underarm seam, and then you can find the top of the sleeve. So if you fold the sleeve in half, and you can find the top of the sleeve cap and match that with the shoulder seam. Okay. Now, the other touch points, you could go through and do like we did for the accent and just slowly match these angles. It looks like they don't fit, but I promise they are actually the same size. They just feel like they're not. So again, remember, we are manipulating without stretching this. Just like with the neckband, I like to start at the underarm point. So let me pin the second sleeve in so that I can just go ahead and sew them both. And believe it or not, we're like nearly done with the bodysuit, because after this, it's a matter of elastic and elastic and snaps. Like this is actually, the bulk of this is already done. So I am going to pin this second sleeve in. It looks like Jennifer makes a great point about bodysuits, and why I love them so much is that they don't ride up. It drives me crazy. I have these overalls that I love, these short overalls, and for whatever reason, my shirts ride up every time I wear them, and it just drives me absolutely crazy. And so I need to just wear a bodysuit with it so that they don't keep riding up everywhere. Um, so, okay, let's start sewing. If I didn't already say this, I also like to start sewing at the underarm point, just like I did the back neck. It doesn't really matter where you start. If you're sewing with a serger, you are going to be kind of cutting in, sewing around, and then making it, finishing off, and then just sewing off of it. It's hard to explain. I don't have a camera right here on my machine, but there are some tricks. I recently saw something on probably Instagram Reels of a different way that somebody was doing it, and it kind of was mind blowing. I don't know about you guys, but I find that I am constantly getting, probably because this is what I watch on Instagram Reels or other Reels, I'm constantly getting these like sewing hacks or sewing tips, and some of them I'm like shocked at how I had never thought of that before. Some of them are ridiculous. I don't know if you guys have seen the like 5 minute crafts thing. It became like a joke with my kids. We would watch it to point out how ridiculous they were. But, anyways, all you're going to do as you're sewing this in is to just work slowly, work your way around. Again, we are not stretching, we are simply manipulating the fabric so that it matches and uh, that way we don't get ripples while you're sewing. But all of this stuff is a matter of practice. Like, um, I didn't wake up one day and sew a bodysuit in an hour. Like, this is years of practice going into all of these different skills. So definitely don't beat yourself up if all of this stuff takes you a lot longer. Um, we all kind of start somewhere, and I'm sure there's things you do that I would be horrible at. I am a serial, or what I call a serial hobby picker upper. And so I'm constantly picking up a new hobby, and sometimes I'm absolutely horrible at it. So everybody starts somewhere. So if this is like your first foray into knit fabric, I promise if you stick with it, it's going to get better. And I always tell my students when I'm teaching that you can treat this first garment kind of like a really good muslin. So it's not going to be perfect. There's probably going to be things that we could change, but it's also the first step, and it's bound to only get better as you go. Okay, so we now have, oh yeah, multi-crafters. Yes, I am a hobby picker-up or multi-crafter, which is kind of why, for those of you watching that have been at our maker events, that's really fun as a multi-crafter to check out some of the other communities within our greater community, because the the bead classes, I was convinced I needed to be a beader after I saw some of those classes. So anyways, that is, let me put this up so you guys can see. So we have sleeves, and they are in. If you are like me and my basting got a little wide, I don't know if you can see that, you can use your trusty seam ripper and just pick out some of those stitches. But it doesn't really matter. Those were just used to baste. So you can go through and pick out any of those stitches if yours was a little wide. Apparently I was very wide because it's wide over here as well. Okay, so we're kind of down to the home stretch, which is good because we're nearing on 2 hours. My goal was roughly 2:15, just because I don't want to keep you guys all day, although I could talk sewing all day, which is probably why I'm constantly calling Sadie on Teams, like video chat, and we end up just chatting and talking sewing. We're way more creative than is our for our own good. So anyways, I love talking sewing, but I will keep it moving. Okay, so there is an elastic requirement chart, and I do have to point out, because I noticed it yesterday. um, you can tell that I do there's a lot of math in pattern making, and I use a lot of like spreadsheets, and it's sometimes it shocks me how much math I do in my job. But one of the things is, you can tell I use spreadsheets to do some of the math, because some of these don't add up. When I went to go do size 20, your total elastic is 30 inches, but if you add the front and the back, it's 30 1/4 inches. So it's not a huge difference because we're going to be doing some stretching. But feel free to do the proper math and not just what my spreadsheet said. So I have this knit no roll elastic that I'm going to be using for the leg holes. Um, I really like this elastic. I have used it a bunch for other projects. So it really any knit elastic is going to work great. And as long as it is, I believe the requirement is 3/8 of an inch knit elastic. We are going to be putting the leg elastic in, and I cut the first piece based on the length in the pattern, and then we need to actually mark where the side seam is. So if you look at the instructions, so in my case, the back needs 13 inches and the front needs the rest. I will mark this with a pin. So I know that this is the side seam, that the shorter piece is for the back because we're going to be stretching the back to fit. And the longer, the 17 1/4 inches, is going to be for the front. Now, the easiest way to do this is you are going to make sure that your garment or your bodysuit is right sides out. Okay, so you can see this accent, and we are going to then go to the leg opening. So because we have it right sides out, we are now going to be working on the wrong side, so the inside. So you can start, it doesn't matter if you start at the back crotch point or the front crotch point. Just know that, remember, the shorter length is for the back. So you are going to pin. You need to have it be away from the edge, like the end, because we end up adding twill tape and folding it all to the wrong side. So you're going to want to make sure you're about 3/8 of an inch from that point. Okay. So what you can do is pin that point. The elastic is quite narrow, so it makes it a little harder. And then pin at the side seam. Okay. And then pin the next piece, or then the other end, the same, about 3/8 of an inch from the end. It doesn't have to be perfect, but this gives you, again, those touch points. Now, let's work on the back first because you can see we need to actually stretch the elastic. So you have a couple of options. You can find the center point of that piece of elastic and the center point of the back leg line and pin those together. It does not have to be perfect as long as it is roughly correct. Then we know that the first half of the back leg is going to be stretched about that much, and then the second half of the back leg is going to be stretched about that much. Now, the front is going to be slightly stretched. It's quite a long piece, so I don't know if you can see. It's really just like barely stretched. Okay, so did you lose sound again, Jennifer, or is this from before? I guess we'll wait and see. Okay, So I'm going to start, but then if it looks like we've lost sound again, let me know. But according to my stuff, everything is still working. Okay. Let me switch camera angles so that you guys can see. This is a step that's going to be done on a regular sewing machine. One time I tried it on my serger and I find that it's just much more complicated to do this step on your serger. So we're just going to take it to the sewing machine. Okay, so like I said, we are just like with, what was it? Where we, oh, I don't know. One of the steps I've previously said, what I like to do is take it to my sewing machine with a zigzag stitch, same as before. It actually could be a little bit wider. So you can do a zigzag of like 2, okay? And then I don't know how to get back at it. Okay, do like a width of 2. And what you're going to do is go to your sewing machine and you're going to stitch for about an inch or so without stretching. Stitch for about an inch, leave the needle down, and then make any adjustments you need to. I find I need to sew a little bit slower than I would normally sew so that I can try. It will not be perfect. If you could see the one that I'm wearing, I will try to keep the edge of the elastic against the raw edge of the bodysuit. So just sort of take your time. This would be a little easier to use my foot pedal, but my table's too tall, so I can't do that. But we will work with it. And you're just going to be sewing for about, like I said, an inch, and then stop. The needle hopefully will stay down. And then just like we did with the turtleneck, you can sew like an inch at a time. And if you need to, stop, stretch, another inch, stop, stretch, another inch. This is essentially sewing the elastic in, but it's going to get a second set of stitches when we actually turn it towards the wrong side and stitch it again. So this is like the initial stitch, and then it will get a second set of stitches. So as long as it's kind of held in there relatively well, you should be fine. And then remember with the front, it barely gets stretched. So just sort of keep that in mind. As with all of these, put as many as many pins as you need to confidently be able to sew these in. But just know it might also be a hot mess. I can feel when my elastic is not cooperating. So it doesn't really matter. It's going to be in your pants. So unless you are routinely walking around without your pants on, you probably don't need to worry about how this elastic goes in. They have, like, I've seen some hacks where you feed the elastic like through the presser foot, but every time I've tried that, it's turned into a bit of a disaster. So I just tend to try to go slowly and hope that it's all going to turn out. Okay, so I will show you guys, instead of having you watch me put that next elastic in, I'm going to show you guys what the next step is. Okay, so what we're going to do is, I think you're laughing, Felicia, at wearing no pants, I would guess. because I don't routinely walk around without pants on. I mean, at home I do sometimes, but as my kids have gotten older, I've come to realize that they don't really appreciate when you walk around without pants on. So things have changed. Anyway, so what we're going to do is you can see we've got our elastic sewn in. We've got a little bit of non sewn part right here. And what we're going to do now is fold the elastic towards the towards the wrong side, the inside of the bodysuit, and either pin or there. So either pin or clip this in place. Now, clips are better. I'm going to go grab my clips real quick. They just tend to hold this without distorting the fabric too much. Okay. So I find these clover clips to work really well. And you can see I kind of missed one of the layers of fabric right here. So if you cared, you could take your seam ripper and open that up. If you're like me and you don't care, then you just sort of clip it and figure it's knit, it won't fray, you can just make it work. So you are just going to fold it all. Now, the thing to remember though, when you get to the back, you can see because we stretched, it means we also need to stretch as we sew the back together, okay? So we'll do this. This is kind of just to hold it in place. And then when we actually get to the sewing machine, we will stretch and sew at the same time. But again, it's not that much. Like it's a total, so technically, the front is 1 to 1 or slightly less. The back is only missing 2 inches. So 2 inches, the elastic is 2 inches shorter. So distributing that 2 inches across this whole back part leads to not very much stretching. Okay, so I'm going to take this to my sewing machine. Again, this is a zigzag. You could actually do like quite a wide zigzag. I like to do, like a 3.5 wide and maybe a 3 length, because it's kind of securing that. It's going to depend. If you did a pattern that called for a bigger elastic, you might want a bigger zigzag as well. Okay, so you just take it to your machine. Actually, I'm going to give myself a little more space. Okay, so we will again stitch for, an inch or so before you start stretching. Just makes it a little bit easier. Then everything is secure like it should be before you actually start sewing. Now, because the elastic is already secure in the fabric, this step is actually a lot easier because you're essentially just guiding the fabric and the elastic through. It's not quite as finicky or shifty as just sewing the elastic in. Maybe because it's got a bit more heft to it with the fabric. So you will just go through when you're sewing the back, just make sure you slightly stretch it. And then when you sew the front, it's barely different. And so you just want to make sure that whatever you did when you initially sewed it in, you continue and do the same for the front. So if you have sewn underwear before, it's basically the same process oh, unless you use fold over elastic. Okay, so let me, unless you use I guess I need this again, but I'll move it. Um, Creating underwear, swimsuits, it's all a very similar process for finishing the leg holes. So I'm going to switch back to the overhead so you guys can see how that kind of looks finished. So this is from the right side. You can see that it now has some zigzags. This is I probably should have, well, it doesn't really matter, but I might have normally have lengthened that zigzag out a bit. You can see here is that one spot that I kind of missed the fabric, but it doesn't really matter. It's not going to fray, so it'll just sort of be a part. I mean, it's at the front crotch of my bodysuit. So honestly, it really doesn't matter. Okay, so I am going to walk you through the last couple of steps, and I won't make you guys sit through sewing in another leg elastic. Let me grab some twill tape. So the instructions call for a strip of twill tape through the crotch point. So basically through here and through here. Okay, so I just have well, I have thick twill tape, so I just cut it in half. It's all going to be enclosed, so like it doesn't really matter. Mine was maybe 1 inch wide, half inch wide, so I just like cut it right down the middle with a rotary cutter, but you could get proper 3/8 of an inch wide twill tape or something close. Okay, so if your fabric is a little rolly, like you can see here, this fabric, once it kind of starts to get stretched, it gets a little rolly. Okay, so if you need to, when you are basting all the pieces together, you can actually baste along the crotch curve together as well. Either way, this one doesn't want to roll quite as much. So because I'm not doing the second leg elastic, so we'll pretend I'm just going to stitch a little so you guys can see what it's going to look like rolled. Okay, and then I will do quickly the other crotch point. Okay. Okay, so this will give you guys kind of a look at what it actually is going to look like. Okay. So you could actually do, you could insert this twill tape with a serger if you wanted to have like a really nice clean edge, or you could finish the edge of the fabric. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. What's going to end up happening is we're going to sew this in, and then we're going to turn the whole thing towards the wrong side. What that does is that twill tape is reinforcing that point so that when we go to install the snaps, it has more like basically what interfacing would do. Okay, so what you're going to do, I'll use this side, is you will lay your twill tape, you can trim so you make it slightly shorter. It doesn't have to be perfect because again, like I said, it's basically like interfacing. And then on the wrong side of this crotch point, whether you pin or clip, you are going to sew the twill tape into that thing. You are not stretching the fabric. Obviously, the twill tape is not going to stretch. And so you're essentially just putting it in. I mean, the reality is you could probably, if you would prefer, you could probably even use something like this heat and bond. This one doesn't wash out, so it's not like a washable. It just would be, it's a really easy interfacing. I just find there's going to be a lot of wear in, or a lot of use of those crotch snaps, that having something weighty like the twill tape will keep that area from stretching and will give it a bit more substance for those snaps. So all you're going to really do is go over, again, you can just use a zigzag stitch. You're going to sew that twill tape into, like, line it up with the raw edge, and then just sew that in. It doesn't have to be perfect, because like I said, you're just using it as um, reinforcement. So if you can tell from here, so we have the twill tape is now sewn in, and all you're going to do is fold it over like we did for the elastic. So you will just fold it over, line up those edges of the actual bodysuit, so along that inside of the leg curve, and then just go ahead. You could do zigzag. I believe in the instructions, I have you do almost like a box. Either way, you just need to hold it down, and so that we have a flat, reinforced area to put the snaps in. So sometimes it's a bit bulky at the one end. So what you could do is start about half an inch in from the edge, sew all the way off the other end, and then you could even turn it and sew from the middle out to the other end. It depends on your machine and how your machine handles slightly bulky things. This machine handles it. Sometimes my other machine does not like things like when you're sewing jeans and you've got like a thick stack of fabric. Um, okay, so let me switch so you guys can see. So now this is the front crotch point. Obviously this side doesn't have elastic, so we'll pretend like it does. And you can see now we've got this. This is finished. We've got the twill tape on the inside. And now you have a couple of options in terms of snaps. So I like to go the easy route and do these like plastic snaps. I have just like a snap press, but you could also do sew-in snaps. It doesn't really matter what you use. So as long as you have some sort of snap. They also have, like they've got them in all kinds of pretty colors too. So what you're going to do, I just have to find my awl. It's hiding. So you can be super technical and get out your ruler and evenly space your snaps, or you could be me and just kind of look at it and eyeball and say, okay, I probably want 3, so I'm just gonna have one near each end and then split the difference and maybe have a third one here. It doesn't really matter. It's honestly, it's in the crotch of your bodysuit. So just like Felicia and I were joking about before, unless you're having somebody inspect this project, I doubt it really matters where your snaps are. So what you're going to do, obviously, yes, Sadie, eyeball it. What you're going to do is you're going to follow the manufacturer instructions for whatever snaps you use. But in this case, for the snaps I'm using, there are 3 different pieces. It's hard to tell for the clear ones, but essentially what I need is 2 of the posts, and then there's a male and female end. It doesn't really matter what goes where in terms of male or female, but as you're installing, you want to make sure that you are, I believe I have you, you are going to either have the back, let me find the back. So I obviously haven't sewn the back, but essentially what you're doing is either the back is going to come forward and you're going to do it with the front on top or with the back on top. Okay, so it doesn't really matter. You can look at things if you have a baby, which we have a new baby pattern in the shop. And so I happen to have baby onesies. And it looks like the baby one, the back comes up and over the front. Okay. So we will do the same. So what that means is we need the posts, or I mean the male part to be on this side, and then we need the post to be on the back. So I just shove my awl through my pre-marked hole, and then you're just going to install it based on whatever your instructions are. In this case, you just shove it in and then put it into this little snap press and take out your frustration. As long as the little plastic bit gets smashed, then you're good. And then you just keep repeating this process across, and then basically do the opposite on the back. So the front has the post on the inside and the back piece. So I'll do the back real quick. The back is going, so the back will have this piece over. So if you can see, I need to kind of line it up. You can even use it as a guide. So like I've laid the fabric over and poked. Doesn't really matter, it's knit, so it's not really gonna stretch. But so when I say the opposite, it's essentially the female part is now on the inside, on the wrong side of the garment, so that it will snap together like that. And then you can just do the rest of them. I got a little off, but it doesn't really matter. And that is how you install the snaps. And now all that's left to do is hem your garment. So, oh gosh, okay, so hemming. There are specialty machines like a cover stitch that's going to give you like that super professional finish where it is typically 2 rows of stitches and the back looks similar to a serger. And I have one of those. I have one that Janome sent, but it's a little more complicated than I want to get into today. So what I'll probably do is film a video, a separate video, because I have, years ago, I learned a really cool method. When you sew on a cover stitch in the round, it's not the same as the serger. You don't want to just sort of start sewing off. And so I've got a really cool method for getting it off of the machine. So I'll film a separate video to show you guys. But just know that you could finish a hem with either a regular sewing machine, zigzag stitch. If you go back to your width of 1 and your length of 3.5, that makes a perfect zigzag stitch for a hem. You could also finish the edge with a serger and then fold it over and do a twin needle. Now, I have not had a lot of success with twin needles, but I'm also not very patient. So I'm sure people can get really great results with a twin needle. What I'm going to show you today is just the regular sewing machine. So I mentioned this Heat and Bond soft stretch. This is especially helpful for, well, I mean, it's helpful for any of them, any of the methods, but it's especially helpful if you're using a cover stitch because it allows you to, you iron it on, and then you fold it that perfect amount, and then you just sew it on your cover stitch, and it gives it a little bit of weight. But I also like to use it sometimes for just regular zigzag. A lot of the times I don't want to pull out my cover stitch. I'm in a new studio now, and I actually have room, so now it gets to just live on my sewing table, but that hasn't always been the case. So if you want to just finish the project, because if you're anything like me, I get towards the end and I'm like, oh my God, please make this be over. I love sewing, but I usually get there at the end of a project. Then the easiest way is to fold it over and take it and do a zigzag stitch. Now, if you're doing a thicker hem, I believe this one is 1 inch. Sometimes, I mean, we've got so many great like measuring tools, but even that, sometimes I don't feel like I get great results. So what you can actually do is take it to your machine and sew a row of basting stitches, whatever the depth of your hem is. So in this case, it's 1 inch. So you would take it to your machine, you would sew in the round a width of 1 inch seam allowance. And then that's a perfect guide to then take to your ironing board, fold it over along that line, give it a good press, and then you know that it is 1 inch around exactly. It also then makes sewing it a lot easier. So that is typically what I do, especially when you're working with little openings like armholes. That's especially helpful. But I do it for anything. Skirts, I do it for wovens or knits. If I have something more than I can eyeball and it won't really matter, then I go and do a guide stitch, and then you just take it out with a seam ripper. So that is my favorite method for finishing it. And I am like the amount of times that I finish with a zigzag stitch far outnumbers the amount that I do with a professional finish. So a zigzag stitch works great, and that's typically how I will finish my sleeves or hems if it's a t-shirt. Um, just whatever works best for you. So believe it or not, even though we didn't do one of the leg holes, we now have a finished bodysuit. I'm very excited. Now I need to, like, this feels very springy, which I think I can still pull off. Maybe if I wear something like brown with jeans, I can make it very fall-ish. So anyways, I'm definitely going to finish this so that I can wear it this fall. But I guess like before we go, and I know there's a bit of a delay, so I'll hang here for a second, but are there any questions, any feedback, um, any sewing tips that you would like, or any other sewing questions that you might have? I'm happy to answer them. And then I will also, you can continue them in the comments. This eventually will be posted. So it was alive today. We're going to be posting it later. And then I can always answer questions later. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to have a sip of my coffee while you guys are getting caught up with the delay. Might be easier if I can look at anything on my phone, since that's a little closer to my face than, okay, let's see. So what I will also do, while I'm waiting to see if there was any questions, I will post. Oh my gosh, I just got my bracelet stuck to my table. I will post in the comments the machines that I used. Janome sent these to me here in my studio to use today. But I will say, and Sadie can attest, that this serger was going to be coming home with me before I knew they were going to send one. So I am a huge fan of the air thread. If you have ever um, worried about a serger, this was a game changer. And like I said, I did post a video, I believe on Instagram Reels. We'll get it on YouTube as well, of how easy it is to thread it. It looks like, thank you, Felicia. Thank you so much for coming. I had a great time. I hope you enjoyed it. And if there are no other questions, then I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys. I hope to do this again. So I would love to hear from people if you enjoyed it. If you didn't, be nice. And I hope to get to share with you guys again. Now that I have my whole, like, we have the whole setup in here, we could do this again and maybe in a smaller format, not walk through a full pattern like this. Anyways, so this was fantastic. I had so much fun. I hope you guys learned something, and I can't wait to see your finished garments. It looks like, oh yes, so my email, Melanie just pointed out, I had said you could email me, but then I didn't even tell you my email. So I will, let's see if Sadie can throw my email in the comments. I will say it, but then if it's typed, it's a little bit easier. My email is kpayne, Payne, at goldenpeakmedia.com. So you guys can email me with any questions. It doesn't have to be specific to this garment. If you have any pattern questions about other patterns in our collection, honestly, if you have questions or emails, feedback of patterns you'd like to see, Sadie and I have a fantastic time of, like, we get together and plan out future issues. And sometimes we think, well, what do people want to sew? So if you guys have any feedback, please let me know. Comment below. Looks like Sadie just put my email address in the comments, so please grab that. And I would love to hear from you. Even if it's just to show me your finished garment, I would love to see all the bodysuits. So thank you guys again for joining me today, and I look forward to doing this again in the future. Thank you guys. Bye.